Okay, this is quite a long daf today. This is actually tomorrow's daf. I'm trying to get a bit ahead, so we're on Lamed Zion. But maybe you're watching this tomorrow, so then it's today's daf. However, what's the name of the rabbi? Rabbi Waxman in Muncie. He always says that a long daf means one generally that's a little bit easier to learn, when it's the shorter ones that tend to be more difficult. So these are one of those Gemaras that people quite often misunderstand. These, you have these anti-Jewish, I don't like the term anti-Semitism, but for lack of a better term, colloquial, we'll call anti-Semitic tracts against the Talmud. And people will say, I don't have a problem with the Torah Jews, I have a problem with the Talmudic Jews, and this and that, blah, blah, blah. And like the ignorance that people have, as far as these things. And one of the things that they'll bring up, there was a tract that came out in Russia, the Talmud Exposed, and all of these horrible things that are in the Jewish holiest book, the Talmud. And this is one of those Gemaras that they'll bring up. And the fact of the matter is that if we study the text, I remember some years ago, I was a Rav in Richmond, Virginia, and I would speak at the JCC, Jewish Community Center, and to the senior citizens group pretty regularly. I would go to the senior citizens group, and this one lady, she said, Rabbi, the Talmud is such a backwards and horrible book and an evil book, and we've got to get rid of it. Why do they still have it as part of Judaism? I said, well, what's so horrible? They said, well, they hate women. I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, it says there, a woman is compared to a bag of excrement. She said, I don't know which tractate it's in. She wanted to show how knowledgeable she was, that she knew a word like tractate. But she said something, I said, well, actually, the source of that is biblical, and that's not what it means. It doesn't mean that woman is a bag of excrement. It means human beings have excrement inside their body, right? All human beings, they have excrement inside their body. And if someone is tempted to commit a sin, they can try a good hint to try to overcome. That's not something you should think about all the time. When a husband and wife are together, that's not what you should think about. But if someone is tempted to commit a sin with another person, it doesn't matter, a man or a woman, we're just talking about what, was talking to men, the assumption would be that would be what they would be drawn after, more likely. And if you're tempted to commit a sin, so that's a way that you can tell yourself, what am I so attracted to? What's inside the body is excrement, and that should turn you off and be able to overcome the desire to commit a sin. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't, whatever. So the lady, she said, after I explained this very clearly and beautifully, and she said, well, why doesn't when I go to temple, I open the Chumash, I open the Bible, and it has commentaries. Why doesn't the Talmud have commentaries like that? So of course, we're here. We have a page of the Talmud. This here we see is the text of the Talmud, right? Over here is Rashi's commentary, which is traditionally printed next to the Talmud. Over here we see Tosfos, which is the grandchildren of Rashi and their contemporaries wrote those. And the other versions of the Talmud, this is a more simple reading of the text. Others will have other commentaries, Rabbeinu Hananel and others on the page. And then in the back they print even more commentaries. And if those aren't enough, you could buy books with even more commentaries. So the simple point is that so much of the anti-Talmud rhetoric, whether it comes from Jews or it comes from non-Jews, comes purely out of ignorance. And so, and that is one of the reasons also, though, why you really need someone to teach you Talmud. You can't just open it up and try to read it. Now, the thing is, the Art Scroll commentary is good enough that it can really be sufficient, that it's like you have a teacher in front of you. And it's a really, really good, and maybe the same thing we could say Rabbi Steinsaltz, who it's Hafla fella. It's incredible how he did that all on his own. And even I remember in yeshiva they didn't mention Steinsaltz, but they said if you're using Cincino translation, also you could say that's having someone teach it to you, because really essentially the text is something that you can't just read, but you need a proper translation, because there was the old Rajkinson translation, which is unable to be read. The Cincino, even though to us it might sound somewhat archaic, but it's really not that bad. It's not really that archaic. Is a more of a fair translation, and it's more of a literal translation. The Art Scroll, the difference is it fills in the gaps much better than Cincino. If you want a succinct translation, Cincino is sufficient, but still you need someone to explain and teach, even with the Cincino. Although it is a useful tool, Cincino, sometimes. That being said, I remember some years ago watching a video from one of the most famous, I shouldn't really mention his name, but from one of the most famous bigots in America. Think of the top bigot in America, right? Most famous bigot in America. So he spoke about how I don't know if it's true or not, but the way he was explaining himself in an anti-Semitic tirade was that he said when he was young, he was quite interested in Judaism. And he wanted to study the Talmud, because that's the classic book of Judaism. And he went to the library and he's like, why can't I find a copy of the Talmud? And he went to so many libraries, he could never find a copy of the Talmud. And then he claims, that when he found out, just how disgusting it is, he said that's why there's no copies, because the Jews don't want people to read it, And again, it goes back to what I'm saying. It's a book that you can't really read. It's a book that has to be taught. As, first of all, the simple reason why you're not going to usually find the Talmud in most libraries is that it's expensive. It's a whole encyclopedia, a whole set of Talmud in English. The Art Scroll, that could set you back $3,000. So do they have? Do most libraries have a budget for Art Scroll Gemara? If there's not that much interest in it, not really. I remember actually in the public library in Kew Gardens Hills, the set of the Art Scroll Shas was donated by a Gentile politician. I don't remember his name. Peter Gennaro, maybe? A fine person who's a very good friend of the Jewish community. And he actually donated the whole set of the Art Scroll Shas to the public library there. It's a Jewish neighborhood. That public library is closed on Saturday and open on Sunday. That's how Jewish of a neighborhood it is. But it's but whatever. To refute the statement of that particular famous bigot who said that he couldn't find the Talmud, Those are the reasons. It's not like there's some conspiracy to try to keep the Talmud out of people's hands. But again, so you want to talk about the Cincino Shas. The Cincino Shas also going to cost probably a whole set will probably at least $900, I'm assuming. So again, is there enough interest to justify buying books like that, expensive books like that? That's the question. But then when you go and you pick and choose, what the anti-Semites like to do is they like to go and pick and choose some passage and maybe just take it totally out of context and present it like this. So these are one of those. This is a text that is actually talking against pedophilia and saying what a horrible, disgusting sin pedophilia is. And unfortunately, the anti-Semites will interpret it as just the opposite, to say that it's encouraging it. God forbid, to say such a disgusting thing. And so, here is a context where they're talking about how they're trying to prevent Jewish boys from being corrupted by pagan boys who might draw them into homosexual practice. Now, we should notice something here. In ancient times, there was no such concept that what's understood today, and perhaps erroneously, perhaps the ancients were more right, perhaps not, who knows, but the concept that we have in the Western world today of what they call sexual orientation, that's not an ancient concept. It was assumed, probably in ancient times, that people were naturally, I guess what they would consider today, pansexual. And that it was society that, as far as nature, and it was nurture that would dictate whether a person would engage in certain activities. And since the Jewish religion viewed certain activities as sinful, they discouraged those activities. And so too, Christianity and Islam, which drew upon Judaism, so too, they also discouraged these activities. I'm trying to get this Lego apart, I'm sorry. And so the society discouraged these activities, right? In the pagan culture, they didn't have any issue with these activities, but it didn't brand you as a different type of person the way that it's taught in America today. That there's some different, I guess this Lego doesn't even come apart, that there's some different group, that there are homosexuals and heterosexuals. That's not a concept that we find in ancient ideology, neither in the Jewish, biblical, or Talmudic ideology, which frowned upon homosexual activity and declared it to be sinful and tried to discourage it. And so too in ancient Rome and ancient Greece. They didn't see people as like being a different category by virtue of engaging in those acts. And generally the ancient pagans were pansexual, I guess by modern terminology, in their activity. And again, since Judaism frowned upon this activity, and it's not like, it's a different type of person, that there's this one type of people that prefers this or does this, and another type of person that prefers that or does that. That concept was never understood in ancient times, it would seem, but rather, now there were other sexual minorities, but homosexual was not considered a sexual minority the way it is considered today, and so therefore it was understood that safeguards should be taken since the activity is seen as sinful. It was understood that safeguards should be taken to discourage the activity. Hello? Hello? Hello?